Age and treachery will always triumph over youth and speed. Welcome to the Indiana Jones universe, the podcast that explores the incredible adventures of the world's greatest globe-trotting archaeologist, Indiana Jones. Each episode is a casual and somewhat humorous, opinionated conversation with a slightly sophisticated analytical study of the expanded universe content from the Indiana Jones franchise. You can expect to find discussions about the adventures of young Indiana Jones, the further adventures of Indiana Jones comic books, the Staff of Kings and Emperor's Tomb video games, the Indiana Jones novels, the original soundtracks, and so much more. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Indiana Jones Universe podcast. Thank you so much for joining us, and today we are extremely excited to continue our interview series for young Indiana Jones, which includes behind-the-scenes conversations with some of the talented directors and screenwriters who contributed to this extraordinary and ambitious television series. Today, we are thrilled to introduce one of the most talented, accomplished, and sought-after camera operators and second-unit directors of all time. He has worked on numerous film franchises, including Star Wars, Harry Potter, Batman, Superman, the list goes on and on. He made his directorial debut in 1988 with the film Rambo 3, contributing to yet another famous franchise. Most notably, he also directed one of the most exciting and action-packed episodes of Young Indiana Jones, The Phantom Train of Doom. With that said, it is my distinct pleasure to introduce our special guest today, Mr. Peter MacDonald.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure.
Well, thank you so much for being here. It's great to have you on the podcast. To begin, tell us a little bit about yourself. How did your film career begin, and how did that ultimately lead to your role on the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles?
I had no training at all. I was working in Fleet Street in London, which is where the newspapers used to be, for an Australian newspaper. And it was a very miserable experience. And I saw an advert that there was a studio opening near where I lived, because commercial television was just about to start. So the editor's secretary was a really lovely lady. She typed a great introduction for me to get a meeting, which I did. And I must admit, I told quite a few lies about my love of photography and all this. I at the time didn't even want what's called a little brownie camera. I had nothing, and I proved that on my first day shooting when I fogged a whole roll of film, because no one told me you have to turn a light out when you take the film out the can. So it wasn't an auspicious start. And the guy that was the head of camera department there kind of forgave me. For many years afterwards, our paths used to cross, and I always thanked him so much, because had he done what he should have done, which was just sack me, because I'd lied a lot about what I knew, just surviving was enough for me. I guess it's every now and again you have a bit of luck, and when you do, you should really grab it with both hands.
Wow, what an incredible story. And, I think that really speaks to your work ethic and determination to excel at something that you really wanted to learn. So that's fantastic. Now, one thing I wanted to ask you about is your work on Star Wars, because you were a second unit director on Empire Strikes Back, which is how you originally met George Lucas before directing Young Indy. So what do you remember about that experience, and what was your first collaboration like with him?
Well, I directed a few second units, and then yeah, that's right. We did the sequence on Empire Strikes Back in the snow in Norway, the Hoth sequence, and that was really tough because it was 40 below, and didn't have anything like I really needed to make things work. But George was very happy with what he saw, and he was happier than Rick McCallum, who wasn't too happy, but George was, and he said, let him do what he's doing. I'm happy, and we're getting a better sequence than I was expecting. Well, I understand they're kind of watching George's money, and I was fairly inexperienced at the time, so they were all doing their job, and it worked very well, you know. So I enjoy. I must say, after many, many years as a cameraman, a camera operator, you know, directing was very much second nature to me. You know, I was used to, you know, working out shots. We had an old Technicolor camera that George has bought many years earlier. The days of three strip, you know, Technicolor was, you know, three negatives going through the camera at the same time. And they converted that to like a first division when the film goes through sideways. So you get a bigger screen. I mean, it was a bit cumbersome. I mean, the camera's about the size of a fridge, but I mean, I think the one we had worked for at least 30 or 40 years, you know, it made huge Technicolor films in the past, you know. So it's
Wow.
one day we're in a hurry to get up top of the mountain because we wanted a sunset and the weather suddenly cleared, put all the gear on toboggans and snowcats and raced up the mountain, only to get to the top and find the box with the camera in had slid off somewhere. By then down the bottom of the valley. Luckily, George never knew about it. And amazing, really, because it skidded down on its own, per se, in this quite substantial box. And we found it at the bottom and brought it up again and made everyone swear they were never told George that his favorite camera in the world was almost lost forever. But
That's absolutely hilarious. What a great story. Now, after all your success on Empire Strikes Back, what do you remember about your initial conversations with George and Rick McCallum when they asked you to direct The Phantom Train of Doom?
George really let you get on with it. You know, I mean, he saw obviously the rushes went straight to him in LA or wherever he was. And if he was unhappy, you certainly know quite quickly. He was very reliant on Rick. Rick basically ran the show very much. I must admit, he and I didn't get on that well, but I did respect the fact that for a TV series, you did get whatever you wanted. I mean, it wasn't oh, you can't have this, you can't do that. You know, they really wanted it to be big and exciting, and that takes time and money. And they did give me very much a free hand, and the other directors as well. You know,
Another thing that was special about this series is that the original concept was to use it as a teaching tool to educate students about historical events. For you personally, did you find it challenging to differentiate this series so heavily from the Indiana Jones films?
I know I liked the fact that they tried to deal with history and trying it to to teach youngsters not only give them an exciting visual film to watch, but also that a lot of it is based on on true stories, you know. So that was quite good. In fact, it was very good, you know.
Now, George also wanted to create a television series that experimented with new digital filmmaking techniques. As a director, what challenges and benefits came from taking this approach?
Well, we shot fairly much straight, you know, normal shooting. Then you had a very good visual effect backup. You know, you had a very good team, special effects and visual effects, and yeah, they would very much back the director. You know, which wasn't always the way on TV. You know, they would once they trusted you, you got all the backing you needed. So then it's up to you to pull it off. You know, George gave me quite a free hand. He liked what we were doing or what I was doing, and Rick wasn't quite so keen on me, but I think George said, no, I like what I'm seeing, just let him go, let him do it, you know. So and because Rick was very much kind of the beach bully and very much domineered the cruise. And of course, you're on it as a director, you're there for a few weeks and you're off. Whereas the crew are there for, hopefully, they're there for many months, you know, so it puts them in a very bad position. Who do they back? I mean, normally you'd expect the crew to totally back the director, but when you're only there for a few weeks out of many months, you know, they also had to know that not to upset Rick, you know.
Now, even though Young Indy was a separate project, the series still needed to incorporate many Indiana Jones characteristics to portray how Indy's boyhood years eventually turned him into the globe-trotting archaeologist that we all know. So, did you have any specific instructions for Sean Patrick Flannery regarding how you wanted him to approach Harrison Ford's iconic portrayal of Indiana Jones?
Not really, because Sean was very together. It was very professional. As long as you told him exactly what you would like, and if he had any problems, he would say, I said to him immediately, but if you have a problem, you know the character better than I do, say immediately. I don't want to start shooting and in front of the crew find out we're not doing the right thing. So it was quite, well, not quite, it was a very good relationship. I mean, I think sometimes when an actor's doing the same part time and time again, they tend to coast on a bit, not really put everything into it. So you have to always keep an eye that the energy level is up. So which I did, and lots of the other actors I'd known for many years, and they're very like professional English actors, give you their very best every day. So it was a good experience.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the reasons why Young Indy was such a special series to be a part of because there was such a strong amount of collaboration all across the production that was really enforced by George and Rick McCallum, and the quality of the acting I think was so much better as a result of that collaboration. So that's great that you noticed that in this episode because I think it's absolutely phenomenal. Now, obviously, Indiana Jones has a certain visual tone. What are the kinds of things you pay attention to as a director to fit into that tone, and does it ever come into conflict with your own personal style?
I don't think so, no, because I mean, firstly, all the established actors knew their part backwards. They weren't learning who they were. I'm very quick thinking and I've spent years and years on films that are full of stunts and stuff. So I'm very quick at working things out. And maybe unlike an American, sometimes when things go wrong, they talk about what's gone wrong. Whereas I think in Europe, you think, well, that's gone wrong. Fuck that. We'll do it this way. We'll make it work. Because we don't have, we were brought up with less money and less time. So instead of talking about it, you try and make it work. That was the way I've always worked. And it's just a very kind of British way of working, I guess. And also, I think we're very lucky in England that there's a very professional attitude towards filming, and it's very much also, I think, much more a team effort than maybe in America. I've often, when I've worked in America, when you're directing or when you're watching someone direct, they're kind of left on their own sometimes a bit too much, and when they need help, they're not getting it. Whereas in England, as I say, there's people that I've known 30, 40 years. So I mean, I say some of them I've known since I was a clapper boy. So if you're having a bad day, they would kind of whisper in your ear about, don't forget, we've got to do this. And I had, marvelous assistant directors that remember, we used to have lots of meetings before we started filming all together. And one, Jamie Christopher, had a kind of memory like you can't believe. He remembered everything that was said at every meeting and just calmly whisper in your ear if you were getting off track, and which sometimes you do, because you have all the pressures and you have an actor in a bad mood or the weather suddenly clamps and you still got to try and shoot. So I was very lucky with my team, and I think I probably couldn't done it as well if I had a totally American team, because there's a thing in England that you do really support the director. I get we have a tendency in England to not talk about it, let's shoot it. Very often in America, there's a lot of talk and not much action, whereas I think we do the opposite.
So let's start talking about the episode you directed in more detail. First and foremost, what did you like about Frank Darabont's script when you initially read it and found out that these two separate episodes would be combined?
Two episodes together, yes, it was all fear because I saw every page there was something there seemed to be like a big thing every couple of pages. There was a big trains and planes and trench warfare, and
Yeah.
it was a real challenge. And of course, on those type of shoots, you shoot your day. You have to shoot your call sheet. You have to finish the day. You have to finish what you're expected to do. Quite a lot of panic in my soul at times. How the hell are we going to get through this? When you have actors that are really behind you and want to make it work, it does make life so much easier than, I mean, I've worked on films, we all have, when the actors are real. pain in the arse, and but this group all really wanted it to work. And the only time sometimes I had trouble with any of the English actors when I wouldn't allow them to do the stunts. I said, no, 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 you're 75 years old. You're not going to jump off a train. And, oh, yes, it'll be all right, Peter. Oh, it'll be Peter. All right, Peter. No, we'll do it. I said, no, you won't. So, but I said we all had a very good time, and it's quite funny because Sean's quite a straight person, and at night they all enjoyed a drink, and I think Sean went in. They all stayed in a little hotel. Most of them were in a camp, but they stayed in a small hotel we found. And I think Sean kind of panicked when he came back and he saw all the English actors there enjoying a few drinks before lunch, before dinner. I said to him, "You'll find at 7 o'clock tomorrow morning they'll all be there, ready, prepared, knowing their words, knowing their action. But they might be suffering from a bit of a hangover, but they know that's their problem." I think he learned over a short period to learn respect for them, and I mean, it's very much like the story of the film, to be quite honest. The filming was very much like the film with this young kind of whippersnapper and these old codgers who lived the life they were going to always live and were always going to.
Yeah, that's a really great parallel between, the actual cast members and how the characters were depicted in the episode. That's really interesting. Now, one of the most incredible aspects of this episode is that nearly all of it was shot on location in Africa. And this was common for the series, and it sort of reminds me of John Ford and his style of filmmaking. Do you have any distinct memories or fun stories to share about working with the cinematographer to capture these amazing landscapes and wildlife footage?
We had great locations, and remember my background was cinematography, so I was very much prepared to shoot in the location I wanted, and even though I knew sometimes it's going to be difficult for the cameraman, but I wasn't one to compromise too much. So yeah, we had a second unit guy that Rick had used quite often, and he did a lot of stuff with the kind of the wild animals, that type of thing. I don't think I even met him. He was sent off early on, with a list of shots to do, and came back 2 weeks later and had done them, and they're all in the film, which gives it. I mean, shots you couldn't have the time to do, and you have a very tight schedule. So I can't remember the name, but it was very good, and I'd say he'd been used before, so they knew they could trust him. And I learned very early on after seeing this stuff that I could certainly trust him, and it could only add to the authenticity of the film.
Well, it's interesting to hear you talk about that in more detail because we learned from another interview with another director that there was a man named Hugh Miles who was, I think, a National Geographic wildlife photographer who did a lot of the work on the series for some of these episodes in Africa. So that's really interesting. Now, one of the other interesting aspects of this episode is that there are many notable historical figures, including Frederick Selous, Richard Meinertzagen, General Smuts, and Colonel von Leto. What did you think was important to communicate to the audience about these historical figures?
Yes, I was. Well, I didn't, to be honest. Now, I mean, I didn't know how true some of these figures were, and then I found out they're all based on actual people from the past, which I think for the actors makes it more exciting. That you're basing your what someone actually has done or thought. So and I say once again, I think with all the English actors, which is the majority of the actors, they are so professional, and they just basically get on with it. Whereas I've worked on some American films when it seems to be a lot of talk about stuff and less shooting, whereas we kind of believe, the more just get on with it, shoot. You're not going to make twist the truth too much. You're still making a film that has to be exciting, which I think we succeeded in doing.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that was one of the things that really grabbed my attention when I watched this episode for the first time because it still has the same spirit of the Indiana Jones films, but it's in a more historical setting, which I think is quite a powerful combination. Now, the production design in this episode is also remarkable, particularly in the bunkers, the trenches, and all these German camps. Do you have any behind the scenes details to share about the locations or sets?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the trench warfare and the prison camp. I mean, they gave me what I would. expect on a feature film. I mean, I really was I couldn't believe what they could for the budget. I know they're all on very tight budgets, especially the art department and the special effects. And I think they took that as a challenge, and I was blown away, with like with the balloon and all these different things. I mean, if you're making a feature, you'd probably take 2 to 3 times the length of time shooting, but of course we didn't have that. So everything really had to work. And also, like with the balloon, it has to be exciting, but it's dangerous, and you always have to keep an eye open for what could go wrong. And yeah, I'm very aware of the dangers that go on, and also what often happens, not often, but what happens, you do a couple of takes, it's all okay, and then people relax a bit, and they lose the edge of the safety edge, and then that you have to watch the whole time, that people's enthusiasm doesn't take over from their awareness of the danger that you're in.
One scene from this episode that stands out to me is when Indy and his comrades are all sitting around the fireplace after sunset. And one of the most fun parts about this episode to me is the humorous and sort of laid back personality of this regiment known as the Old and the Bold, who teach Indy how to embrace spontaneity. Now, during moments like this that have powerful moments of dialogue, what is your approach to working with actors on set to achieve the best performances possible?
Well, I think when you have a group of actors like we had there, you really just basically trust them. I mean, if you feel they're going off the rails a bit, then butt in. But they really know what they're doing. They know what their part is, and and I always feel. I mean, I've worked on so many different films over the years, as not as a director, and I've watched directors, in my experience, kind of screw up scenes because they don't let the actor have their head, because if an actor's any good, he's talked through these parts much more than anyone else on the film. He's and I say especially with the English actors, especially are very very professional. I mean, it does scare sometimes some of the Americans you work with when they see how much some of the English actors can drink. But I always say to them, at 7 o'clock tomorrow morning, those actors will be on set and they will be dressed and ready and word perfect, So there is a very professional attitude, with the English actors, and that's their life. I mean, they I guess because lots of them came from the theatre when there was obviously a lot of drinking went on, and it's always been that way. I mean, probably less now with the younger actors, but the old timers. I mean, I used to be terrified, how much they could put away and still be there the following day.
Well, it's interesting to hear you speak about that in more detail because one thing that came to mind as you were saying that is, you have all this experience as a camera operator and a second unit director. And this was one of your early roles as a director on a television episode. So, how did your previous experiences in those different roles influence the way you approach this episode from a director's standpoint?
I think you always want to try and make it as as exciting as possible. I try to get as much coverage, other shots as I can, so you can edit later, so you can speed things up or change things a bit. Very seldom to do everything all in one, and then there's no way out. I like the ability later to be able to cut it down or speed it up, and that means you've got to work at quite a good pace, which I'm quite good at. Because I know what I want, I know what you can get away with. So and I also find with the crew, if you work at a good pace, they're much happier. They kind of they don't want to sit around half an hour, 2 hours, doing nothing. Also, it gives less chance for people to be nervous, and I think they believe their initial instincts. Especially the actors. They believe because if there's too much thinking about things, I think sometimes it goes the wrong way.
Now, I think arguably one of the most exciting parts of this episode is when Indy and his comrades steal the train. Right? There are so many incredible stunts, particularly when one of the characters has to walk across a thin line of wire between the cars to escape from German soldiers. I mean, it's absolutely fantastic. And, I'm sure this entire sequence was not only challenging, but also really ambitious to create. So, could you share some behind the scenes details about what it was like to create such a climactic action sequence with real trains?
Well, the actor stuntman that did it could type, right? He could type walk, whatever you would call it.
Wow.
Underneath him, we had we blew it out, so you don't see it. We later you see the tracks instead of we had a small platform carriage, safety mats on in case he did fall, and above him there was a wire that held him upright, So, and all these things obviously are wiped out later in post-production. But this guy would, I mean, he could have probably done it because he did type walk, so he could have probably done it anyway. But I wasn't prepared to take that risk, so that was all quite exciting. Also, very nerve-wracking because you're terrified of something going wrong and the railways in Africa, there was always a rumor that another train was coming towards us, but there wasn't like a timetable like you would have in Europe or America. Every now and again a renegade train would come through, and
Oh my God.
I mean, obviously we had lots of safety things ahead of us, and there was a few times, people can go off on a side in and let the train pass, or they would let us pass, But you're always very well aware you've got this great big thing thundering through the night, and you needed the empty track ahead of you. And of course, it was quite a dangerous thing on top of the train. And the assistant directors came up with all these doubles. And unfortunately, they brought them up when the actors were there. And Freddie Jones, one of the famous actors, said, "Who are these people, Petey?" I said, "Well, doubles if we need them." He said, "Doubles? We don't have doubles." Because they were a really ragged bunch of doubles. Because there wasn't much choice, where we were. And they said, "No, no, we'll do it all ourselves." And I must admit, probably 80 to 90% of the stunt work was done by the actors. And I think it shot on top of the train, especially, which is very difficult. And also, a one-track railway, and there's rumor there was another train coming towards us, but there was no communication with it. All these type of things were going on, so you were very much on your toes, because one thing you can't afford is an accident, And I've always been very, very conscious about safety.
Wow, that's absolutely insane to hear you talk about the logistics of making this all happen. So, could you maybe elaborate a little bit more on what it was like to be working with these real trains on real tracks in Africa, and sort of what did you do to make sure that this was not only exciting but also safe?
No, the train was a proper train. It was I think they found it in a museum or somewhere, or maybe we're in Africa, so it was probably still a working train. We had our own. It was a single track, but we had hopefully weren't always too sure about this. We had total control of this track, because there weren't that many trains going to come along, but it was always that fear that something could slip through the net, so you're always very much eyes open. I said to the AD and the train people, if ever you think anything's going wrong, just you don't ask me. You stop the train, do whatever's necessary, because one thing you couldn't afford to do is with these great big things is hit each other, because that would be this total disaster. So it was exciting, and I think that's why, in my opinion, it looks so good because it was real.
Yeah.
There's quite a lot of tension around, and I must say, my admiration for these fairly elderly English actors, who wanted to do almost everything themselves, was fantastic because they'd do all this stuff, work all day, do their own stunts whenever possible, and then couldn't wait to go back to the camp or the hotel and get a few drinks down them. And I used to walk through the bar sometimes, after meetings, and they still be there about 11 o'clock at night. And I'd say the AD, get them to bed because, tomorrow's going to be another big day. But they never once let me down. They were always there. I'm sure at times they were suffering, but that's the way that these old timers were, because I don't suppose many left now, but they were brought up to really enjoy life, and part of the enjoyment was always quite a lot of drinking went on.
So you're essentially saying their personalities in the episode were exactly the same in real life?
Very much so. They didn't have to think too much about their part. Yes.
Well, it's so great to hear that they were such fun people to work with, and I especially like how different each of their personalities are, because it totally adds to the fun spirit of the episode. And it's also incredible how much constant action there is in this episode, too, because there is constantly so much happening all the time. So, for complex sequences like this, that require lots of stunts and practical effects, do you prefer detailed stage directions in the script, or do you like having more flexibility to make your own decisions in the moment?
Yeah, I prefer to. I could always think, how can someone sit in an office in Los Angeles or London storyboard a sequence without ever being there, without knowing all the different things that can be done? So it was always quite nice to, you have your basics that you have to do, but to keep a very much an open mind about the stunts and what you can do. And I say the crew I had and the actors I had always loved the challenge, and it was and we had a German special effect crew I'd worked with before, Heinz, Helmut, and can't remember, but they're all three H's. They were fantastic. I mean, they just loved the challenge. Was never too much, was. I found sometimes in America, especially, a sort of talk about things, whereas these Germans just this is what you want, Peter, we give it to you. And they were really tremendous. And I think I did over the years two or three, four, about three films with the same group, and they were never once let me down. And and then and you go in the bar at night, they're also drinking a few liters of beer, but they're always there in the morning and always no excuses.
Now, when Indy and Remy capture Von Leto, they travel in a hot air balloon and get shot down by a biplane. What cinematic techniques were essential during these scenes to capture all of this aerial footage and make it look realistic?
Well, a lot of it was done for real. We had the balloon we had on at times we had it hanging from a crane, and you wipe out the cable later. Thinking about it now, we dragging that balloon across the jungle and the basket and hoping that no one's going to fall out. I mean, the great thing about all the actors, they were all up for it, and I think once young Sean saw the English actors, how professional. I mean, they might have been getting on a bit, but they're so professional. You would never do anything totally stupid. I mean, you always have to and would always think about the safety aspects of everything. But of course, there's always something that can go wrong if people don't concentrate. But it was very exciting to do. And I mean, the actual shooting was very much like the actual film. The characters were like they are in the film, the gung-ho old fellows and this quite nervous young American, So there wasn't that much acting had to be done.
There are numerous scenes in this episode with Indy and Remy arguing, which sort of adds a fun comedic aspect to the episode. Do you have any great memories to share about working with Ronnie Couture, the actor who played Remy?
I think, fun enough, it was very much shooting was very much like the script. I mean, Sean was obviously in disbelief quite a bit of the time about what we were doing, what we were asking him to do, and Remy just very kind of casually and nonchalantly went along with it. So he had a very natural humor about him, and I think he was I mean, a joy to work with. He was a really lovely person, and he just had a nice humor, and he just fitted the part perfectly.
Now, one thing I wanted to ask you about is this final interaction between Indy and Von Leto, because I think it's really fantastic at illustrating, the irony of this young, untrained soldier capturing a well respected and accomplished military strategist. And I particularly like the moment when Von Leto decides to give Indy and Remy his compass, which is a nice callback to an earlier moment in the episode. So, as you reflect on this final scene, what theme did you want the audience to take away from this episode?
I think what comes out in it is you might be enemies, but you could have kind of mutual respect, for each other. I think that came off quite well. I think the humor was there's humor in there, which I think happens when people are in danger and in situations that they don't want to be, and you kind of try to bring humor into it. So I think it had a reality to it, which I think worked quite well.
I want to circle back to something that you mentioned earlier, which is that George and Rick, were really insistent on creating episodes that were as exciting and as high quality as a feature. And the interesting thing is that, of course, this was originally made for network television. So, as you mentioned earlier, you had limited time and resources to make it all happen. As you've been speaking about some of these, exciting action sequences, do you have any specific examples to share with us about what it was like working within those limits and, maybe what some of the challenges were that you had to face?
They made so much of this, George and Rick and that the scripts were very much polished and worked. The timing was worked out so that you wouldn't shoot on it, then there wasn't time to put it in the film. So I think it was reassuring that you knew almost certainly what you shoot would be there. Because I know Rick went out a couple of times to do a bit of second unit shooting, and then as much as possible, I did as much shooting as myself as possible, especially the big action stuff. And Rick, I know, I wouldn't say he and I got on well, but he did. He supplied what you needed. I mean, and he knew, even if sometimes it's a bit more expensive than we had in the budget. I don't think I was ever refused what I needed or find a different location. It's always George liked what we were doing, so that basically is it. If George likes it, then you're basically home and dry. And he did, and we came under budget and under schedule. Rick said, "Oh, fucking feature people! There goes my budget. There goes my schedule." And at the end, we'd finished, I think, 3 days under schedule and several thousands under. Eventually, it was quite nice. Rick's said, "Where do you want this check sent?" So I said, "No, what do you mean check? I've been paid every week." He said, "No, the money you saved, we're going to reimburse you with it."
Wow.
So I said, "Well, I don't want you to do that." I said, "But I know that we had a lot of trainees and young people on the film that got no money at all, very little money." I said, "I think I'd rather you spread it out amongst them,"
Wow.
which I think surprised Rick quite a lot because I don't think Rick and I got on too well. And of course, it was what I did was what I felt was right, but also it's a very nice thing to do. And all these youngsters who were basically trainees and getting very little suddenly had a nice bonus. So
That's incredible.
I felt good, they felt good, and Rick was confused.
Well, that is absolutely amazing. And it's so great that you recognize not only the amount of talent on this episode, but you wanted to actually commend the people who truly made it all possible. So that's fantastic. Now, once the episode was finished, did you get the chance to collaborate with George Lucas directly during post production?
Yes, I went to the States and got involved in the editing, yeah. But I mean, George very much that was his kind of province on not only producing and writing, but he loved the editing process. I went to was it San Francisco, I think it was, and a couple of times we disagreed, and I remember one day he thought one thing and I thought another. Then I looked out the window and I looked at George's estate, which is out the window. There's a whole village square, cars everywhere, and I said to him, "Well, I think I was right, George, but I said I looked out the window just now and I saw what I saw, and I said when I'm at home, I look out the window and I see a Volvo car parked in my drive. I said you're obviously doing something right." And he didn't have the greatest sense of humor, but he kind of did a chuckle. And I think most times, we met halfway. And you also, I mean, you have to respect, he's a fantastic, filmmaker.
So, two final questions here. First, as you know, the series regrettably got canceled by ABC in 1993. However, George Lucas, and the visionary he was, had originally planned for Young Indy to go on for another season. And supposedly he had this extensive timeline detailing many, many more stories that were going to be developed into full length episodes. Was there any indication that you would return to direct other episodes in the future?
Yes, there was talk about it. And, I'd have loved to have been more involved as possible because you're very seldom going to work on something when you're given everything you need I think that always helps, not to say this, we're going to do this, and look around the crew and they're going, oh shit. Whereas, the crews I've used to work with love to challenge, because that's the way I used to be as a cameraman and second director, if, if that's what you want, we're going to try our utmost to give it to you. And it makes it quite exciting to do, when you having people in all your career makes it so much easier.
Now, as you reminisce about the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles, nearly 30 years later, what did you take away from the experience, and what impact has the show had on you as a filmmaker and as a person?
That's a very good question. It made me feel later there's nothing that could be thrown at me that I couldn't do, because it gave me the confidence. When I sometimes try to look at a call sheet, I'll read the scenes. I think, oh, the shit, we're going to do this, and we always did. And so it gave me confidence that almost anything is possible, especially if you had, the right crew and the right attitude. And I was lucky most of my life. I've had a lot of the same people working with me, or I've worked with them for, 30 odd years. So there was a great mutual understanding and respect, So with George and Rick, the most important thing was making the film as interesting and as exciting as possible, which was, quite even though it might cost a bit more money, they were very good filmmakers.
Well, Peter, you have been absolutely so kind with your time today. Thank you so much for joining me here on the podcast to share so many terrific stories about your experience with George Lucas and working on young Indiana Jones. Thank you so much.
I honestly can say it's my pleasure. Thank you very much.
And to all of our great listeners, thank you so much for listening. If this is your first time listening to our podcast, make sure to subscribe. You can also leave a review to tell other people about the show, and you can visit our website, www.theindianajonesuniverse.com. If you want to get in touch with us, you can email us there. You can also follow us over on X to join our great community of indie fans and podcast listeners. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Once again, I'm Will.
And I'm Peter MacDonald, and until next time, so long, Dr. Jones.